What about the importance? What level of importance do you attribute to the graphic, to the artist in the war games? What's your opinion about? Is it so important, the graphic in a war game?
It's vital.
Like.
And a perfect example of that is the graphics in MacArthur, The Road to Bataan, which was a game published in the Wargamer, were so horrible that the game, even though it was a good game, sunk quickly out of sight, largely, I think, because of the graphics, which started with the maps and ended with the game counters. So, and the only thing I would really add is that certainly over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been simply a complete revolution in graphics in a positive way, in the sense that right now I am working on playtest maps, which 30 years ago would have been final art being published by SPI.
Do you have the same opinion, Dana?
I think that the first thing everyone notices is the art. And therefore, that's your entry. It grabs your eyes, it makes you want to look more closely, or it repels you. As Jack just said, that game, MacArthur and Bataan, was so awful, was so terrible.
That's true, yeah.
No one wanted to play it. They walked away from it. Redmond Simonson, who was the graphics head of the art department at SPI, caused an entire revolution in our hobby, in our game industry, because he was such a gifted man, such a brilliant graphic artist. And we mentioned Roger McGowan.
Yeah.
Roger was an apprentice under Redmond and learned his trade. And of course, Redmond died some years ago. Roger's still with us. But now we look at the standard, the quality standard is being set by Roger. But really, that first step, those first games, and what grabbed people, what made them go, oh my God, I've got to look at this, I've got to look at history. And SPI was exploding with Strategy and Tactics magazine. It got into the hands of thousands and thousands of people.
That's true. We can say that the maps, the SPI maps, are still good nowadays.
That's right.
Yeah.
And the counter art and everything. But he was laboring under restrictions of costs, because back then in the 70s, two-color art was very expensive.
Yeah, that's
Today, we just take for granted I can have
Full
the
color.
colors of the rainbow, right? I can have multicolored counters, right? And we take that for granted, but that was revolutionary. He was able to do two colors and make it look like it was 4 or 5.
That's true.
He made people love this artwork so much and so interesting. He came up with, area movement, large hexes, all these other things that no one had ever even tried at Avalon Hill or any game before. And this stuff should not be forgotten. Redmond is no longer with us. He passed several years ago. But what he did was revolutionary. And we know now today that Roger McGowan, who's now the master, the current, but he didn't just come up with this on his own. He served as an apprentice under Redmond. Okay? Just the old traditional apprentice. His internship started with Redmond. So, and he always makes that connection and reminds people of how important Redmond was. Now today there's so much, many colors available, full color. As Peter was saying, you could put 100 colors on a counter. It doesn't cost anything more than just one. So why not use that? I did a lot of graphics when I started because it was cheaper than you didn't do it on a computer. You actually did it the old-fashioned way with knives and pens and everything. Rubylith and all that, the first way of making color overlays. I don't do that anymore, not because I don't like it. It's because it's so technical, and the people who do that every day are so fine-tuned about the graphics and the tricks being able to, once you learn the software, they're now up to edition number 88. And I'm still back, in the old days of doing it by hand. But I understand the process. I understand what goes into the graphics for colors and those things. And it's still true that the artwork is the single most, in my opinion, not only games, but just about everything. If a poster, of a game, if a movie poster, anything is going to grab your attention, it's because the artwork is so well done.
Dana, you are right. And I want to change my question to Peter. Peter, didn't you think that a good graphic could conceal a bad game, a bad system game? So we have understood that the graphic is vital. Well, it's important, but I want to flip my question. Didn't you think that we can conceal with a good graphic a bad game nowadays, above all?
Okay, it can get you a cheap victory in the sense that it can get somebody to buy the game. But as soon as the reviews go up online, you cannot underestimate. Back when we were buying games, right, you had to rely upon word of mouth of maybe the one or two friends that you had in the area that could tell you whether a game was good or bad. Now, people can go right up to any number of War Games Digest and see whether your game's a piece of crud, regardless of the cover. And so you can't hide like you used to be able to do under a large art budget. The one thing I do want to mention is, notice how before you said that you remembered the cover of Desert Steel, and it's been a quarter century since you've seen it.
It wasn't so bad.
It was a wonderful cover. We spent a lot on those covers. And
a lot of colors, yeah.
So what a good piece of art can do is it can elevate on an aesthetic level that product to attract a wider audience. But if the basic game is bad, it's still not going to do very well. The other thing I want to mention is that there's two elements to like the genius of Redmond Simonson. One is aesthetic and the other is pragmatic. Mm-hmm. What Redmond was great at was both using graphics as a way of enabling new forms of mechanics. Like he had 3D maps for some of his science fiction games. And I mean, as a kid, I learned the Pythagorean theorem because Redmond Simonson's Starfleet's games required me to learn how to do X, Y, Z squared kind of algorithms. I think that a great game design, again, needs to compel on both an aesthetic but also a pragmatic basis. And I think that that's really where the genius of a lot of game art comes in, is when that same element is serving two functions.